Alright, so here's this week's weekly Witch Queen campaign mission. I'm doing a solo flawless master run. The mission this week is the last chance. Nothing crazy for the weekly modifiers. They're the same as the Nightfall. It's chaff, so we don't have radar. Not a big deal. So I've decided to go with Stormcaller. If you'll remember, towards the end of last season, actually it was during this same campaign mission when it was on the weekly rotation, I was running Stormcaller with Spark of Brilliance and Wish Ender, and I was running Arc Soul, obviously. And I had stated in that last video that it would be worth revisiting Arc Souls come this season because they got a massive buff. So with that said, Arc Souls are pretty good. There was a couple sections where I just kind of let the Arc Soul do the work on the thralls. Once you get used to how much damage it does now, which I don't know how much more damage they said they buffed it by, but it was something fairly big, like 50% or something. And so, of course, when you get amplified too, then your Arc Soul is basically on steroids, and it increases the fire rate, so it increases the DPS. So, pretty good. And since we have unstoppable grenade launchers in the mix, I decided to go with Forbearance, because it is an insane grenade launcher, especially with chain reaction. And if you run Spark of Beacons with it, which is what I'm doing, it creates blinding explosions. And that's what you saw in the introduction clip, was what Forbearance can do, or any special weapon that's arc. When you're amplified, what it does is it creates blinding explosions everywhere. So it's especially good with Forbearance and chain reaction. So whatever doesn't get killed by Forbearance is likely going to be blinded, which I can then either just follow up with whatever for an easy kill, or I can shoot them in the head with Wish Ender to create another blinding explosion, because that's what Spark of Brilliance does. Now also, when I last did this mission last season, I noticed that Spark of Brilliance, when it creates a blinding explosion, it jolts targets as well. And I assume that's because I'm using Spark of Shock, which is Arc Grenade's Jolt. So for whatever reason, Spark of Brilliance, when it's procced, it seems to be coded the same as a Flashbang Grenade, and then benefits from the Jolt as well, which is kind of an interesting fact. I couldn't tell if, because I'm not sure, I didn't proc Spark of Brilliance all that much, especially when there was lots of ads around the target in this run, because I was just basically killing everything with Forbearance. So I couldn't tell if that was still the case. And I did go through last season when I discovered that Spark of Brilliance was jolting. I wanted to see if it would work with Spark of Beacons as well, because they're both coded, or they're both, described the same way. It's a blinding explosion. It creates the same effect on the targets around it. You see that big kind of transparent blue bubble that explodes when you set off a blinding explosion. But when I had tested it last season, I couldn't get Spark of Beacons to jolt. So, yeah, it's honestly hard to tell with Forbearance, because chain reaction is basically jolting everything. Anyways, that's what Jolt is. It's a chain reaction type effect, so it's kind of hard to say for sure if Spark of Beacons this season is doing anything different than last season, because I just honestly couldn't tell because of the chain reaction effect that's already part of my Forbearance. But either way, Spark Beacons is a very good fragment to use, especially it's especially affordable to use as well on Warlock, because if you're using Electrostatic Mind, you don't need to use Spark Vions. You don't need any fragments that give you extra ionic traces, because with the aspect Electrostatic Mind, anything that you kill with an arc ability is going to give you an ionic trace. Anything that you kill that's jolted, anything that you kill that's blinded, is going to give you an ionic trace. That includes damage from your grenades, obviously, your arc soul, etc. I could have swore the Unstoppable was stunned, but this is the thing with the Unstoppable grenade launchers. It's not super reliable, and I honestly prefer using the hand cannon most of the time, just because it's very reliable and it's much cheaper to use. Like, using an Unstoppable grenade launcher mod takes out a good portion of your build capacity because it costs 7 energy. So it's like you could basically run nothing else on your arm piece if you're running Unstoppable grenade launcher. And if you're like me, where you're kind of particular about your stats and build, then it just doesn't always seem worth it. Yeah, so you can see what Sparking Beacons did there. Pretty impressive. And then you can see how good the Arc Soul is here on Barrier. Like, it just annihilated the last bar of his health without me even shooting him. So Forbearance, I actually used when I first was experimenting with it, was on Duality, because I just crafted it. I got my last red border from Val the Disciple, so I crafted Forbearance, and I said, okay, now's my time to go and do Duality, because waveframe grenade launchers are very good in that dungeon, especially for the vault encounter when you have to kill the shielded phalanx. And when you first craft Forbearance, you can put Unrelenting on it and Golden Tricorn. And just in my Duality solo flawless attempts alone, I leveled up Forbearance like 13 times. And I found that Unrelenting saved my butt several times. And this is just with Golden Tricorn, not even Chain Reaction. So imagine how much more often you can proc Unrelenting when Chain Reaction is killing multiple targets with every shot. And I know that the god roll for Forbearance is typically an Ambitious Assassin with Chain Reaction, because that way, as soon as you get like a multi-kill with Forbearance, then it overflows the mag to give you 2 shots. So you can just do 2 shots in quick succession. You know, it allows you to deal more damage all at once to chunkier targets, or, you know, big waves of ads. But I'm not a huge fan of Ambitious Assassin, just because it's not a super reliable perk per se, because if you're already in the rhythm of reloading a grenade launcher after you shoot, then you don't always know when you got 2 shots and when you got 1. right? So it's just kind of a smoother gameplay, I find, with grenade launchers, just to know that you have a consistent mag size. And honestly, Unrelenting is, I found it was too good to pass up, especially for doing solo flawless stuff, where often you have modifiers like togetherness and attrition. Whether you're doing the weekly campaign missions or the weekly nightfalls. So you basically need a toolkit with your builds, your abilities, your weapons to heal you in some way and keep you alive. So Unrelenting is one of those perks that's very valuable to solo gameplay, especially for those types of missions with those modifiers. So that's why I decided, I just went with Enhanced Unrelenting, and I think I masterworked it to have reload. And then if I'm doing dungeons where I don't need anti-champion mods, I can run a grenade launcher reloader, and you know, my reload is so fast on it anyways that it's not a big deal to not have Ambitious Assassin. And Chain Reaction just does so much work anyways. And you'll notice I didn't go with Weaken Clear. Like, I mean, the play, if you're really gonna seize on the opportunity to take advantage of seasonal artifact mods, if you're gonna use a grenade launcher for unstoppables and whatnot, you may as well run Weaken Clear on it, which is another expensive mod. Takes up 5 energy on your class item. And personally, I'm more hooked on using my class item to boost my ability regen for whatever my build revolves around. So in this case, I'm using the Stag warlock, so I'm relying on my Rift. Not only that, but I'm using Arc Soul. So I need constant uptime on my Rift for the damage resistance, the survivability, and the Arc Soul. Another thing about the Arc Soul on doing these missions where you've got the Lucent Hive and they've got the little moths that detach from them, the Arc Soul will automatically take out the moths for you. So that's a nice little benefit. So this section here is kind of long and tedious. Yeah, as soon as you're done with that first wave, then you've got to come to center, and you got this light bearer warrior. Or actually, the first section, there's like 2 waves of ads. Right? You got the first wave where you got the couple Arc Shielded Knights, you got Barrier, and you've got the Solar Wizard. Actually, no Barrier. But once you take out that first wave, then you got to go towards the middle and grab. As soon as you spawn the sword off the knight and start taking it back, then you get a second wave that spawns like behind you, so you have to pay attention to that. Like, naturally, this section kind of makes you feel like you should just be, advancing one wave at a time, but it's very easy to get caught off, and before you know it, you've got a wave that spawns behind you. Last time I did this mission, I think I was using the Ogma Solar Pulse Rifle for Unstoppables. And for the solar shielded wizards. And I was using Wish Ender to pretty much kill everything else, and I had had my Arc Sword from Dares of Eternity. But this season, as we've got a shift in the artifact mods for taking out champions, I needed either a grenade launcher or hand cannon. And this isn't. There are some missions where you could really go without Unstoppable and just kind of manipulate the champion and kill him a little bit more slowly. But this isn't really one of those missions because there are quite a few Unstoppables. It's already a pretty long mission, so you don't really want to be wasting too much time, and you do lose points if you waste too much time on these missions. And if you're going for your weekly pinnacle, obviously you want to get this done in decent time so that you've guaranteed yourself 100,000 points. Because if you don't, then you don't get the pinnacle. Mind you, I'm all done with that stuff anyway, but still, the goal is to do these missions in decent time to guarantee myself 100,000 plus points. So I didn't want to waste too much time on Unstoppables, and not only that, but towards the end up here, when you start progressing through these smaller rooms, each room has like a bunch of Arc Shielded Knights, a ton of ads, and you've got the wizard boss, who's a Lucent Hive, and each room has a champion or a light bearer. So the first room has an Unstoppable Ogre, the second one has a barrier, and the third one has a Lucent Warrior. And not like the ads include a bunch of Cursed Thrall as well, so you can't really you don't have time to manipulate an Unstoppable when you've got the ad density in those small rooms. So I was kind of playing with fire a little bit with some of these Unstoppables. Kind of just waited in my rift for them to get close and see if I can get a finisher, but in some cases they would punch me, and I'm sure if I wasn't standing in my rift it'd be an instant death. But I was able to survive with a sliver, like probably 1% of my health left. So I definitely not advise doing that if you're not like 100 resilience, if you're not in a stag rift. Don't let the Unstoppables get that close. And here I'm trying not to waste too much of my linear, because I know an Unstoppable is going to spawn behind me as soon as I'm done with these two wizards. So that's the thing, when you've got Unstoppables to deal with in these small spaces, you need to take them out fast. So save your heavy for them if you can, save your super. And if they ever get too close and you've got like a pillar or a piece of cover nearby, you can kind of play ring around the rosy with them. They're slow to move. I mean, they close the distance pretty fast because, they're charging you. So they kind of put you in panic mode. But if you know you've got a hard piece of cover nearby, then you can kind of toy with them.
No signs of the crystal so far. Just rows and rows of jars filled with Is that light? But it's tainted somehow.
Saravoon has always encouraged her wizards to push boundaries of hive magic. It seems that hasn't changed with the light.
So another thing I did this week was, since I've already reached the pinnacle cap on all three of my characters, and I've got all the seasonal weapons crafted, so I don't need to do Heist Battlegrounds anymore. I don't need to grind pinnacles, so usually at this part of the season I'm more focused on, you know, making content, doing solo flawless stuff. But outside of that, you know, I could also afford to spend some time farming. So for example, like I still hadn't gotten myself a, what is it called, the Fallen Sunstar, the exotic for Warlock that came out last season, Season of the Plunder, which is that kind of star-looking spiky exotic helmet for Warlock, which basically enhances all the ionic traces. So you can, it's basically an ability spam type of exotic, which looks pretty cool. So you can be amplified much more frequently. You get your abilities back. So all in all, it sounds like a pretty good exotic, fun to use. So I'm looking forward to using that. But yeah, so I took the time to go and grind out a Lost Sector when it was, you know, helmets. So unfortunately, the one I got is like super high in discipline, no resilience, no recovery. So I'm not too sure if I'll be able to make a decent build and be satisfied with my stat spread on the one that I did get. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to grind out more Lost Sectors or exotic engrams in hopes that I can get a better one. Which is unfortunate, because when you don't have an exotic, the Lost Sector RNG favors giving you the exotics that you don't have, right? And then once you do have it, whether you believe it or not, thereafter, the game is, it's not going to favor that exotic anymore, right? It's going to be completely random. So given the amount of exotics that there are, exotic helmet pieces that there are for Warlock, you know, there's probably like 7, 8 or something. And then your chance of getting the exotic, any exotic, is like 25% in a Lost Sector. So you might have to do 4 of them to get one exotic engram. And then you've got like, you know, a 10, 15, 20% chance to get the exotic that you want. So that cuts your RNG down drastically. And then you've got the RNG of the stat spread. So, and yes, I'm using discipline on my ghost, so that armor pieces that I do get will give me a minimum of 10 discipline, but it helps a little bit, but it doesn't help a lot. So it's pretty unmotivating to go and do like Lost Sectors over and over again. So I'm not too sure if I'm really gonna spend a lot of time trying to get a better one. I'll just kind of do one here and there. You know, I'll get exotic engrams from doing just anything anyways at random times. So it's not a big deal. If I end up getting lucky and getting a decent Fallen Sunstar, then I'll probably do a build for it and do some videos on it. But I'm not, it doesn't really bother me either way. Like Crown of Tempest, Eye of Another World, like those exotics already help boost your ability spam. And I've played them on Stormcaller, but I just prefer the Stag. I don't find like Stormcaller has a lot going on for it that's unique about its abilities. So I don't really feel like having the need to spam them is all that great compared to spamming Vortex Grenades on Chaos Accelerant with Void on Voidwalker. Like that gives you a good reason to spam abilities when you've got a grenade that's as powerful as a Chaos Accelerant Vortex Grenade with Devour, right? So you're very enticed to spam abilities because they're so good on other classes. So Voidwalker, Starfire Protocol, Touch of Flame, the Touch of Flame aspect on Solar Warlock, Touch of Thunder on with Heart of Inmost Light on Titan. Or if you're on Revenant Hunter with Duskfields, like those are good. Those are good aspects and builds to fully build into for ability spam. But Warlocks kind of just got plain old abilities. Like their grenades aren't better than any other class's grenades. They're nothing. Like the Arc Soul's pretty good. So, and the Arc Soul's unique. So that's basically why I built it Stormcaller the way I do, was because that Arc Soul is kind of what it's got going for it that other classes don't. So I figure if I can do a high recovery Warlock that can spam rifts like back to back, then I'm constantly going to have Arc Soul up. And while I'm at it, I may as well enhance my rift itself by making it so that it gives me damage resistance. So with all that said, like this Stag Warlock that I keep using, it may be my tankiest class out of all of them, depending on the playstyle. As long as I can play whatever I'm doing in the mission or the encounter or whatever, if it relies on me being stationary in one spot, holding down a position, Stag Warlock all the way. It's probably the tankiest build I have out of all three classes. If I'm doing ad clear and survivability, if I'm mixing the two, then I would say Solar Titan all the way, because anything that you're killing with your hammer, which is ad clear, it's going to be hitting sunspots, which you're going to hate, especially with Ember of Empyrean and all that. That's an aggressive tanky type of build, whereas Stag Warlock is aggressive, or is defensive type of survivability. And then I would say coming close to as good as this would be, well, Lorelei Splendor on Sunbreaker. I mean, Sunbreaker in general is just super good. Definitely top notch for survivability. It's hard to say if the Stag Warlock is better than Sunbreaker. I feel like they're both about the same. But I would use Lorelei Splendor in a similar way to using the Stag. Whereas if I was using Syntheseps, then I could be ad clearing and surviving at the same time. But Lorelei Splendor kind of relies on her Sunspot from your class ability. So in a sense, you're playing position, playing from range. You can, on the spot, heal yourself. But yeah, so that was fun.
Devotion inspires bravery.
Other than that, this week I might try and do Warden of Nothing. I'm not a big fan of that Nightfall. But I'll probably challenge myself to do it anyways. But if not, next week I'll be doing another solo Flawless Seraph Shield, most likely, to do it under 30 minutes. So you can stay tuned for that. And there's my Alloy and Pinnacles and High Stat Armor. Anyways, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one. I'll see you in the next one.